The world of 10-year-old Alara was a symphony of contradictions, a place where profound beauty was born from bleakness. Their tiny fourth-floor walk-up apartment in the city's forgotten borough smelled perpetually of damp plaster and boiled cabbage. Rainwater drew weeping maps down the grimy window panes, and the floorboards groaned underfoot like a dying man. Yet, within these gray walls, magic happened. It spun from the fingertips of her mother, Maria. Maria was a wisp of a woman, with a translucent quality to her skin and a cough that rattled her thin frame like a loose shutter in the wind. But when she held a needle and thread, she became a sorceress. Scraps of silk, discarded bolts of velvet, forgotten cuts of lace in her hands. They transformed. She could coax a story from a seam, a poem from a pleat. Her creations were not just clothes. They were whispers of forgotten gardens, echoes of moonlit ballrooms, promises of a life they could only dream of. Alara would sit for hours on a stool in the corner, her knees tucked to her chest. Watching, she watched the way her mother's tired eyes, the color of faded denim, would ignite with a creative fire. She watched as her chapped, calloused fingers moved with a dancer's grace, stitching constellations of beads onto midnight blue satin for Maria. Every design was a prayer for a different life, a prayer for her daughter. "One day, mija," Maria would murmur, her voice raspy. "Women will walk like queens in my dresses, not because of the price, but because of the feeling. The dress finds the soul. You see, it doesn't just cover the body." Their fragile world had one regular, dissonant note, Serafina Devereaux. Serafina was everything they were not. She arrived in a cloud of expensive, cloying perfume that clung to their threadbare curtains long after she'd gone. Her heels would click with sharp, impatient authority on their worn linoleum. She was a sculpture of ambition. Carved from marble and ice, her smile a dazzling, predatory thing that never reached her eyes. She called herself Maria's partner. "Maria, my darling." "My secret weapon," Serafina would coo, her eyes scanning the latest masterpiece draped over a mannequin as if she were a general surveying a new cannon. She never looked at Maria directly for too long. It was as if the sheer, unvarnished poverty of her partner was physically painful for her to behold. "You are a true artist, and I am the one who will give your art a stage the world can see." Alara hated her. She hated the false sweetness in her voice, the way she called Maria darling, while her eyes held the cold calculation of a pawnbroker. A child's intuition is a powerful, primal thing. It doesn't understand nuance or business. It understands predators. And Serafina was a predator in a cashmere coat. One Tuesday, Serafina arrived with an air of electric excitement. She was carrying a crocodile leather portfolio and a bottle of champagne they couldn't possibly afford to drink. "This is it, Maria," she announced, her voice a theatrical whisper. "The investors are ready. They believe in my vision, in our vision, but I need to show them the full scope of your genius. Not just one dress, but the entire collection, the dream, from start to finish." She gestured toward Maria's most prized possession, a worn, leather-bound sketchbook. It wasn't just a book of drawings. It was Maria's heart, rendered in charcoal and ink. Inside were dozens of designs. A complete, breathtaking collection titled Midnight Bloom, gowns that mimicked the unfurling of night-blooming jasmine, cocktail dresses with the sharp, dangerous beauty of thorned roses, a wedding dress that flowed like liquid moonlight. It was Maria's life's work. "Let me take the book," Serafina said, her voice dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial tone. She placed a cool, manicured hand on Maria's arm. "I will present it to them myself. I'll tell them about you, about the artist behind it all. This book, this will be our ticket out of here. Maria, a real studio, proper heating, medicine, for you, a new life, for Alara." She said the last words while looking directly at the child. A strategic masterstroke. Alara saw her mother's resolve crumble. The mention of a better life for her daughter was the key that unlocked Maria's last defense. With trembling hands, Maria handed over the sketchbook. It felt like she was handing over her own soul. "I'll guard it with my life," Serafina promised, tucking the book into her expensive portfolio. She popped the champagne with a loud, jarring bang that made Maria flinch. They drank a toast from chipped teacups. It tasted like betrayal. The weeks that followed were filled with a fragile, agonizing hope. Maria's cough seemed to lessen slightly. She spoke of the future, of a small studio with a large window, a fabric she could buy by the yard instead of scavenging for scraps. Alara tried to believe, but the cold knot of dread in her stomach only tightened with each passing day. Serafina didn't call. The discovery came on a rainy Thursday. Alara had been sent out for a loaf of bread with their last few dollars. On the way back, she saw a newsstand. The glossy covers of fashion magazines protected from the drizzle by a plastic sheet. And there it was, on the cover of Vogue Premiere, smiling her triumphant, empty smile, was Serafina Devereaux. The headline screamed, "The Overnight Queen Serafina Devereaux and the Birth of a Fashion Empire." Alara's breath caught in her throat. Behind Serafina, a model was posed in a stunning gown of deep indigo, embroidered with silver thread in a pattern that mimicked a star-dusted sky. It was the comet's tail, the centerpiece of the Midnight Bloom collection. Alara's small hands, numb with cold, fumbled to buy a copy. She laid the magazine on their small kitchen table. Maria stared at the pages, her face turning a waxy, ashen color, page after page, her designs, her soul, presented as the singular, brilliant vision of Serafina Devereaux. There was no mention of a partner, no mention of Maria. The article lauded Serafina as a once-in-a-generation talent who had single-handedly redefined modern elegance. Something inside Maria broke that day. It wasn't a loud, shattering sound. It was a silent, catastrophic collapse. The creative fire in her eyes was extinguished, leaving only gray, empty embers. She stopped sketching. She stopped sewing. She stopped talking about the future. The cough returned with a vengeance, a cruel, rattling sound that echoed the hollowness that now filled their lives. Doctors were a luxury they couldn't afford. Maria wasted away, consumed by a sickness that was equal parts tuberculosis and a broken heart. Alara became her nurse, her provider, her sole companion. Watching helplessly as the woman who had stitched dreams for others unraveled before her eyes. Maria died in the autumn, on a bed that smelled of regret, leaving a 16-year-old Alara utterly, terrifyingly alone. The day of the funeral was cold and relentless. A handful of neighbors stood awkwardly by the cheap pine coffin. Alara didn't cry. The tears had frozen somewhere deep inside her, turning into shards of ice. All she felt was a cold, pure, diamond-hard rage. After the last shovelful of dirt was thrown, she walked away from the grave, clutching the only thing of her mother's she had left a single, forgotten charcoal sketch of a fiery, defiant bird, a phoenix that had fallen from the sketchbook before Serafina had taken it. She stopped under the gray, weeping sky, the paper growing damp in her fist. She looked up, not at the heavens, but toward the distant, glittering skyline of the city where Serafina Devereaux was being celebrated as a queen. A vow formed in her mind. not as a whisper, but as a blood oath, a promise etched onto her very soul. You took her life. You stole her light. You built your throne on her bones. I will not just survive. I will climb out of this gutter. I will learn every secret of your world. I will build an empire larger than yours. An empire built on real talent, on my mother's legacy. And then, Serafina Devereaux, when you are sitting at the very peak of your stolen mountain, I will be the one to rip it all down. I will make you feel the same cold, the same darkness, the same nothingness you left us in. I will take everything from you. This, I swear on my mother's grave. The orphaned girl turned her back on the cemetery and walked toward the city, no longer a child, but a weapon waiting to be forged. The hunt had begun. The years that followed were a crucible. The fiery, all-consuming rage of Alara's grief cooled, not into embers, but into a core of black. Unbreakable obsidian, she was no longer a girl fueled by raw emotion. She was an operative on a long, clandestine mission, her life split into two distinct, hermetically sealed halves. By day, she was a ghost in the city's machine. She was the waitress at a greasy spoon diner, her face a neutral mask as she refilled coffee cups and cleared away half-eaten plates. The smell of burnt bacon clinging to her hair, she was the late-night cleaner in sterile office buildings. Her movements swift and silent as she erased the day's traces, invisible to the executives whose portraits lined the halls. She was the stockroom girl at a fabric store, her hands aching as she hoisted heavy bolts of cloth for wealthy hobbyists, her heart aching for a different reason. Every dollar earned was a bullet for her arsenal, meticulously saved, fiercely guarded. But by night, in the solitude of her small, bare room, Alara came alive. The ghost put on flesh and blood. The space was a monk's cell dedicated to a single religion fashion. The walls weren't decorated with posters, but with pages torn from library books, the history of Dior, the architecture of Balenciaga, the rebellion of McQueen. Her floor was her workshop, with an almost fanatical devotion. She practiced. She deconstructed thrift store jackets to understand their anatomy. She taught herself pattern making from faded, 20-year-old textbooks. She sketched until her fingers were numb, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with designs that grew sharper, bolder, and more sophisticated. Her style was being forged in the furnace of her reality. It was beautiful, but it had jagged edges. It was elegant, but it screamed with a defiant, raw energy. She lived on stale bread and fierce determination. The world of Serafina Devereaux was a distant, glittering galaxy she observed through the telescope of fashion magazines and society blogs. Serafina was no longer just a designer. She was a brand, a symbol of untouchable luxury. Her face was everywhere, her name synonymous with success. Each image was a drop of fuel on Alara's cold fire. The turning point came not with a bang, but with a squeak of a rusty hinge. Alara, now 22, was on a weekend cleaning shift in a once grand, now slightly dilapidated residential building in a forgotten, formerly fashionable part of town. She was assigned the top floor, a penthouse that had been unoccupied for years, save for one resident who insisted on using the service elevator and demanded absolute privacy. As she polished the dusty brass fixtures in the hallway, a gust of wind from an open window blew a loose page from the sketchbook she always carried in her apron. It slid under the door of the reclusive resident. A small, furious gasp escaped Alara's lips. That page held a dozen thumbnail sketches for a jacket, a design she'd wrestled with for weeks. Heart pounding, she knocked softly on the door. It creaked open to reveal a woman who seemed to belong to another era, tall and ramrod straight, with a severe chignon of silver hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. She was dressed in a simple, perfectly cut black silk robe. The air from her apartment smelled of jasmine, old books, and something sharp, like defiance, in her hand. She held Alara's sketch. "Is this yours?" The woman's voice was low, resonant, and coated in disdain. "Yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry." The wind. The woman ignored the apology, her sharp eyes flicking from the paper to Alara's cleaner's uniform, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. This shoulder line. It's impossible. Structurally unsound. An amateur's fantasy. Alara, who had endured insults and invisibility for years, felt a spark of her old fire. "It's not," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "If you anchor the weight with a hidden cantilevered seam to the collarbone, it distributes the tension. It would work." The woman's eyebrows shot up a fraction of an inch. She stared at Alara, truly seeing her for the first time. She saw the cheap, worn-out uniform, but she also saw the intelligence in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. "Who taught you?" "No one. I taught myself." The woman let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. "Of course you did. The ones with real fire always do." She looked down at the sketch again. "You want to get into the fashion world? Is that it? You want to swim with the sharks? Little girl, you'll be eaten alive." "I'm not afraid," Alara said. The woman's gaze was so intense it felt like a physical weight. "My name is Madame Ava, and I know you are not afraid. I see it in you. I see the hunger. It's the same hunger I once had. It's the same hunger that woman, that thief Serafina, has." Alara froze. The name, spoken with such venom in this strange, time capsule apartment, was a shock to her system. Madame Ava saw the reaction. A slow, cynical smile touched her lips. So there is a story. There always is with girls like you." She stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in. Let me see if your hands are as clever as your mouth." Alara entered an apartment that was a museum to a fallen queen. Mannequins stood like silent sentinels, draped in magnificent, dust-covered gowns. Yellowed newspaper clippings of Eva's past triumphs were framed on the walls. Beside photos of her with legends of a bygone era, it was the sanctuary of a genius who had been exiled or had exiled herself. For the next hour, Eva interrogated her, firing questions like bullets. She tested Alara's knowledge of fabric, of history, of technique. She was relentless. Her every word designed to expose a weakness. Finally, she walked to a corner and pulled a dusty bolt of fabric from a chest. It was a cheap, unforgiving gray wool, the kind used for military blankets. She threw it at Alara's feet. "Here is your test," Madame Ava declared, her eyes glinting. "I want a dress, not a sack, not a uniform, a dress. I want it to speak of defiance, of beauty found in a barren land. You have until tomorrow morning. There is a sewing machine in the next room. It is old, but it is honest. Do not disappoint me. Disappointment bores me." For Alara, it wasn't a test. It was the first door that had opened in 6 years. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She worked with a furious, transcendent focus. The cheap, scratchy wool was an enemy to be conquered. She didn't have the luxury of drape or sheen, so she fought it with structure. She molded, pleated, and top-stitched the unyielding material into submission. She used the fabric's inherent stiffness to her advantage, creating a sharp, architectural silhouette with a high, dramatic collar that framed the neck like a shield. She didn't have adornments. So she created a pattern of intricate, raised seams that swirled across the bodice like battle scars. When Madame Eva entered the workroom the next morning, she stopped dead. On the mannequin stood the dress. It was severe, powerful, and breathtakingly beautiful. It was a fortress and a flower all at once. It was a testament to a will that could not be broken. It was, in its stark grayness, everything Alara was. Eva walked slowly around the mannequin, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She touched a seam, felt the tension in the collar. She was silent for a full minute, a silence that stretched Alara's nerves to the breaking point. Finally, she turned to Alara. Her face was stern, but the storm clouds in her eyes had cleared, revealing something that looked unnervingly like respect. The world you want to enter is a battlefield. Girl, Eva said, her voice lacking its earlier scorn. Talent is not enough. You need armor. You need a strategy. You need to understand that designing a dress and waging a war are the same thing. Serafina Devereaux understands this. That is why she won. She paused, her gaze locking with Alara's. I will teach you. Not because I am kind, but because I despise what that woman stands for. And because my own war is long over, and I am bored. Eva pointed a long, elegant finger at Alara. Lessons start at dawn tomorrow. You will work your pathetic jobs, and then you will come here. You will bleed for your art. You will forget what sleep feels like. You will call me Madame Eva, and I will call you Recruit. We will forge you into a weapon, because in the war you want to fight, you don't get a second chance. Alara nodded, her heart swelling with a fierce, painful gratitude. The years of lonely struggle were over. The real training was about to begin. The next 2 years were a blur of fire and steel. Madame Eva's penthouse became Alara's entire world a training ground, a laboratory, and a sanctuary. The lessons were relentless and brutal. Sentiment is a flaw in the fabric. Recruit, cut it out. Eva's sharp voice would cut through Alara's exhaustion as she draped muslin over a form. Your lines are emotional. Make them intentional. A seam is not a scar. It is a statement of strength. Understand the difference. Eva deconstructed Alara's raw talent and rebuilt it with a foundation of immaculate technique. She taught Alara the language of fabric, the mathematics of a perfect cut, the psychology of color. But more than that, she taught her the art of war. She made Alara study the business pages as fervently as fashion magazines, to understand supply chains, profit margins, and the flow of power, to beat a dragon, Eva would say, her eyes glittering with cold fire. You must not only be a knight, you must understand the dragon's hoard. Alara's day jobs continued, a grim necessity that fueled her nightly crusade, but now, the invisibility felt different. It was no longer the invisibility of the ignored, but the invisibility of a predator waiting in the shadows. She observed the wealthy women she served, their postures, their desires, their insecurities. She was gathering intelligence. Finally, one spring evening, as Alara put the finishing touches on a jacket of such savage elegance, it seemed capable of drawing blood. Eva made a declaration. You are ready! Alara looked up, her eyes wide. Ready for what? To draw blood, Eva said simply. A first strike. We don't have the money for a real battle, so we will not engage in one. We will stage an ambush. We will be a rumor. A flash of lightning that makes them wonder if they saw it at all. We will make them talk. The plan was audacious, born of necessity and Eva's theatrical flair for rebellion. They would create a capsule collection 7 looks, a magic number and showcase it during the city's official fashion week. Not in it, but on it. Like a parasite feeding on its host, they would stage a guerrilla show in the grimy, graffiti-scarred alleyway behind the main venue, precisely timed for the moment the official, boringly commercial show ended. They would catch the editors and buyers as they fled out the back, hungry for a cigarette and a moment of authenticity. Every saved dollar, every cent Alara had bled for, was poured into the collection. Eva added a significant sum from her own hidden reserves, a gesture that was the closest she'd ever come to expressing faith. Alara chose a name for her fledgling brand, the name from the one sketch her mother had left behind Phoenix. The 7 pieces she created were her autobiography in fabric. There was a coat of stiff, treated black canvas, as unyielding as armor, but its lining was a flash of fiery, defiant red silk, a secret promise of life. There was a dress of gunmetal gray, its surface a complex map of raised, geometric seams, telling a story of scars turned into shields. The final look was a gown of the purest white, but its silhouette was sharp, almost aggressive, with a collar that rose like wings around the model's face. It was innocence, but it was an innocence that had been through a war. The night of the show was electric with a terrified, hopeful energy. Their models were not agency girls. They were street cast, a punk musician with a shaved head, a dancer with an athlete's powerful grace, a poet with eyes that held 1,000 stories. Their hair was slicked back, their faces pale and stark, as the doors of the official venue opened, flooding the polished front steps with press and air kisses. Alara and Eva were in the back alley, on Eva's signal. A portable generator roared to life, powering a single, harsh white spotlight and a speaker that blasted a raw, percussive beat. One by one, the models walked a makeshift runway of wet pavement, their faces illuminated against the backdrop of brick and graffiti. The effect was stunning. It was a violent, beautiful interruption of the status quo. Some people, fleeing the stale air of the official show, stopped and stared, confused. A few scoffed, dismissing it as amateur theatrics, but a handful the ones who mattered. The ones jaded by commercialism and starved for something real were captivated. They saw the clothes, the raw power, the story. They raised their phones, and the rumor began. Liam Thorne was one of them, a young journalist for an online fashion journal. He was ambitious, sharp, and deeply tired of writing fawning pieces about legacy brands selling the same tired ideas. He had ducked out the back for some air, his soul aching with boredom. When he heard the music, he followed the sound and stumbled into the scene. For him. It was like finding an oasis in a desert. This wasn't fashion, it was a manifesto. When the last model had disappeared back into the shadows and the light cut out, plunging the alley into darkness, Liam moved in, his reporter's instinct firing on all cylinders. He found Alara in the shadows, her face pale, her knuckles white as she clutched a cable. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice urgent. "Phoenix," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. "That was incredible." Liam breathed, his eyes scanning her face, sensing the immense pressure coiled behind her calm facade. "That wasn't just about clothes, was it? There's a story there? What are you so angry about?" The question was so direct, so insightful. It caught Alara off guard. For the first time, someone saw past the seams and saw the soul of her work. She looked at him, at his intelligent, curious eyes, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long-time kinship. "Anger is a powerful fuel," she said, her voice finding its strength miles away. In her penthouse office overlooking the glittering city, Serafina Devereaux was preparing to leave for the night. Her own show had been a triumph of commercialism, safe, opulent, and wildly profitable. An assistant, a nervous young man eager to impress, approached her with a tablet. "Ms. Devereaux, there was a minor incident outside the venue tonight. It's starting to pop up on a few indie blogs." He showed her a grainy photo from the alley, a model in Ilara's white warrior angel gown, her face a mask of defiance under the harsh spotlight. Serafina glanced at it, her expression unchanged. "Street theater," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Desperate for attention. It's pathetic." "They're calling the designer Phoenix," the assistant added. Serafina paused for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering over her crocodile leather briefcase. Phoenix. The name struck a faint, dissonant chord in the polished marble of her memory. A bird rising from ashes. It was a cliché. She dismissed it. "Amateurs burn bright and fast," she said, her voice as cold as the glass walls of her office. "By next season, they won't even be a memory." She turned and walked out, a queen secure on her throne, completely unaware that the first stone had just been loosened from its foundation. The rumor had been born. The alleyway show was a lit match in a dry forest. It didn't start a wildfire, but it created a trail of smoke that the right people couldn't ignore. Liam Thorne's article, titled "Phoenix Fashion's Furious New Voice," became a sensation in the small, influential world of fashion-forward blogs and magazines. He hadn't just written about the clothes, he'd captured the raw, defiant spirit of the event. Painting Ilara as a mysterious, compelling new force, the effect was immediate, if not overwhelming. 2 avant-garde boutiques, one in New York and one in Tokyo, placed small, risky orders. A handful of top-tier stylists requested pieces for editorial shoots, for the first time. Ilara's designs were not just her private obsession. They were a product, a commodity, a voice in the global conversation. With the boutique advances and Eva's carefully managed funds, Ilara finally shed the last skin of her old life. She rented a raw, industrial loft space with high ceilings, exposed brick, and huge, grimy windows that flooded the room with stark, honest light. It wasn't a showroom, it was a workshop, a command center. The Phoenix had a nest. The workload was crushing. Ilara knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed a soldier, someone who believed in the mission. She thought of Chloe, a girl she'd worked with at the fabric store. Chloe was bright, hyper-organized, and possessed a fierce, quiet loyalty. She had often watched Ilara sketching on her lunch breaks, her eyes full of a wistful understanding. When Ilara offered her a job, a tiny salary for brutally long hours, Chloe quit her stable position without a moment's hesitation. "I always knew you were meant for more than folding bolts of polyester," Chloe had said. Her face beaming as she stepped into the news studio, she became the operational heart of Phoenix, managing orders, wrangling suppliers, and acting as a warm, grounding force against Ilara's obsessive intensity and Eva's aristocratic frost. The 3 women formed a strange but formidable triumvirate. Eva, the grand strategist, Ilara, the visionary general, and Chloe, the indispensable lieutenant, keeping the army marching. Liam Thorne became a frequent visitor to the studio. His initial journalistic curiosity had deepened into a personal conviction. He was certain that the furnace powering Phoenix was stoked by a specific, profound injustice related to Serafina Devereaux. Under the guise of a long-form historical piece on Serafina's iconic rise, he began to dig. He spent weeks in dusty newspaper archives and digital databases, piecing together the timeline. "It's strange," he told Ilara one rainy afternoon, hunched over a coffee in the studio. "For someone so famous, her first year is a black box. There are articles about her grand debut, then Nothing. Before that. She was a mid-level socialite. She didn't go to design school. Where did the genius come from? The official story is she was a natural prodigy who burst onto the scene fully formed. Geniuses aren't born fully formed, Alara said, her voice low. They're forged. Their alliance was quiet, unspoken, built on a shared passion for the truth. He brought her fragments of the past. She, with her intimate knowledge of the wound, gave him the context to understand them. Meanwhile, the name Phoenix began to echo in the marble halls of the Devereaux Empire. A Devereaux-sponsored charity event listed Phoenix as a featured silent auction item. A top model, a contracted Devereaux girl, was photographed by paparazzi wearing a Phoenix jacket on her day off. It was a minuscule erosion of Serafina's total market dominance, but Serafina had not built her empire by ignoring small details. She ruled with the vigilance of a tyrant. The first attack was subtle, almost deniable. The small family-owned Italian mill that produced the signature black canvas for Alara's coats, a supplier Chloe had worked for months to secure, suddenly sent a terse email, due to an unforeseen shift in raw material costs. Their price for Phoenix was tripling. Effective immediately, it was a death sentence for their profit margin. Chloe was frantic. It doesn't make sense. They loved us. I spoke to Gianni last week. He said we were his favorite new client. Alara felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Call their other clients. Chloe, find out if their prices went up too. An hour later, Chloe hung up the phone, her face pale. No, it's just us. 2 days later, the owner of the Tokyo boutique called, his voice full of genuine regret. He had to cancel their substantial reorder for the fall collection. He was cagey about the reason, mentioning pressure from his primary investor. Liam did some digging. The boutique's investor was a subsidiary of a larger holding company, which was, in turn, controlled by the financial arm of Serafina Devereaux. The invisible walls were closing in. It wasn't a direct assault, it was a quiet, systematic strangulation. That night, the studio was tense. The elation of their small successes had evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of the war they were in. Alara stood before a large corkboard, a new addition to the workshop. In the center was a glossy, smiling photograph of Serafina. She's not going to let us get a foothold, Chloe said, her voice tight with anxiety. She'll starve us out before we even get to the battlefield. This is the battlefield. Chloe. Eva's voice cut in. She had been observing from her customary chair in the corner, a silent, assessing presence. She did the same to a dozen others in her time. She isolates you. She cuts your supply lines. She makes you feel alone, paranoid. She wants you to exhaust yourself fighting shadows. So you give up. Alara stared at the picture of the woman who had destroyed her mother. She didn't feel fear. She felt a surge of cold, clarifying rage. This was not a shadow. This was a confirmation, acknowledgement. Serafina saw her. She finally saw her. She's testing us, Alara said, her voice steady. She wants to know what we're made of. She turned to face her small team, her eyes blazing with renewed purpose. She thinks we're made of fabric and thread that she can cut. Let's show her we're made of steel. Liam, who had been quietly mapping out the corporate connections on a notepad, looked up. He pinned a new piece of paper to the board, a complex diagram of companies and names. Red yarn began to connect Serafina's central photo to the Italian mill, to the Tokyo investor, to a fabric treatment plant that had mysteriously lost their last shipment. A web of power, invisible to the world, was slowly becoming visible on their wall. Eva is right. Liam said, this is how she operates. She's a ghost in the machine. Alara picked up a marker and drew a bold, defiant circle around a date on a calendar hanging on the wall. It was the first day of the next, and most prestigious, Fashion Week. "Then we stop fighting the ghost," Alara declared. Her gaze fixed on the date. "We forced the queen out of her castle and into the light." The air in the room crackled. The skirmishes were over. The siege was about to begin. The corkboard in the studio was no longer just a map of the enemy's territory. It was a declaration of war. Alara's decision to force a direct confrontation hung in the air, a goal so audacious it was nearly impossible. A spot on the official main stage of Premier Fashion Week was a sanctified position, reserved for established empires and a handful of heavily backed, industry-anointed darlings. For an outsider like Phoenix, it was like a foot soldier demanding a private audience with the emperor. "It's impossible," Chloe said, her voice a mixture of awe and terror as she stared at the circled date on the calendar. "The application list closed months ago. The slots are a closed circle." "Then we break the circle," Eva said. She rose from her chair and walked to a locked, ornate antique chest in the corner of the studio, a piece of her old life she had kept. She opened it, the scent of cedar and old memories filling the air from within. She retrieved a small, black leather address book. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. "There are people in this industry who owe me," Eva said, her voice laced with a profound bitterness. "Debts I never intended to collect. To do so is to admit they still have power over me." She stopped on a page, staring at a name. "But for this, I will swallow my pride." That night, Alara watched as Eva made the call. She saw the iron mask of composure on the old woman's face, the rigid set of her spine. The conversation was short, clipped, and heavy with the weight of decades of unspoken history. "Auguste, it is Eva. I am well aware of the time. I am calling in the marker. Yes, that one. I need a slot for a designer. Her name is Phoenix." A week later, a formal invitation arrived. Phoenix had been granted a slot on the final day of Fashion Week. It was a terrible time slot early morning, when most editors were hungover or jaded, but it was a slot nonetheless. The news sent a shockwave through the industry's inner circles. Serafina Devereaux, upon hearing the news from a sputtering assistant, was said to have shattered a crystal water glass in her hand. The upstart gnat had not been swatted. It had just grown wings of steel. The 2 months leading up to the show were a frantic, desperate, brilliant storm. The cost of a full runway production was astronomical. They sold Alara's future profit percentages to a daring independent investor Eva trusted. They called in every favor. Chloe, a master of logistics, stretched every dollar until it screamed, negotiating with lighting technicians, sound engineers, and model agencies with a tenacity that belied her warm demeanor. Alara, meanwhile, descended into a creative trance. She barely ate or slept. The studio became her entire existence. She was not merely designing a collection. She was scripting her revenge, stitching her mother's eulogy, and crafting her own coronation all at once. The clothes that emerged were breathtaking. They were an evolution of her style. The architectural severity was still there, but it was now softened with moments of startling vulnerability. A coat of hard, polished leather was lined with fabric printed with a faint, ghostly image of her mother's handwriting from an old letter. A gown of black silk had a slash of blood-red fabric cutting across its heart. Each piece was a word, a sentence, a chapter in her story. While Alara and her team built their arsenal of beauty, Liam hunted for the sword of truth. His cover story had gotten him into the dusty, forgotten corners of corporate archives. He followed a trail of shell companies and dissolved partnerships, a thread that always led back to Serafina's early days. He finally found a name, Arthur Finch, a bookkeeper fired for incompetence just after Serafina's first major success. It took Liam 3 weeks to track the old man down to a quiet retirement home in a sleepy suburb. Arthur Finch was a man haunted by decades of guilt. His hands trembled as he stirred his tea in the retirement home's bleak cafeteria. "I knew it was wrong," he whispered to Liam, his eyes constantly darting towards the door. Maria was the talent. A gentle soul. Serafina. She was a shark that learned to walk on land. She paid Maria a pittance, called her a consultant. Then, when the collection was done, she took everything. She told me to cook the books, to erase any record of Maria ever being paid for design work. I was a young man. I had a family. I was scared of her. The old man slid a thin manila envelope across the table. I couldn't destroy everything. My conscience wouldn't let me. I made a copy of one of the original ledgers, the real one. It shows the payments to Maria, with memos specifying design commissioned for Midnight Bloom collection. He looked at Liam, his eyes pleading. Use it. Clear her name. Clear my conscience. It was the smoking gun. The news of Liam's discovery was a shot of adrenaline to the exhausted Phoenix team, but their celebration was short-lived. Serafina, enraged and threatened by their official inclusion in Fashion Week, escalated her attacks from covert strangulation to overt violence. They arrived at the studio one morning to a scene of devastation. A burst pipe from the vacant floor above had sent water cascading down, directly onto the rack holding their most intricate, nearly finished pieces. The damage was catastrophic. Several key looks were ruined. The delicate fabric stained and warped. The timing, a mere 10 days before the show, was no accident. This was a direct, vicious message. Chloe wept openly. Even Eva's face was a mask of grim fury. But Alara, after a single, sharp intake of breath, became terrifyingly calm. The last vestige of the frightened girl was burned away in that moment, leaving only the hardened, resolute woman. This act of aggression didn't break her. It liberated her. The fight was no longer just for her mother's memory. It was for her team, for her future, for everyone Serafina had ever tried to crush. "She wants us to panic," Alara said, her voice quiet and deadly. "She wants us to miss our deadline. We will not." What followed was a miracle of sheer will. They worked around the clock. Alara redesigned the ruined pieces on the fly, her hands a blur of motion, her mind sharper than ever. They slept in shifts, on a cot in the corner of the studio, fueled by coffee and a collective, burning rage, the night before the show. The studio was quiet. The collection was finished. A silent, defiant army of garments lined up on racks. Each piece was perfect, imbued with a new layer of ferocious energy born from the final trial by fire. Liam walked in and placed a neat file on the central work table. It contained pristine copies of Arthur Finch's ledger, a notarized, sworn affidavit from the old man, and a side-by-side photographic comparison of Maria's original sketches and Serafina's first collection. Eva placed the final, minute-by-minute runway schedule beside it. Chloe confirmed the models were sequestered and secure. The four of them, the general, the strategist, the lieutenant, and the truth-bearer stood together in the quiet loft. The city's indifferent lights twinkling below. There were no more words to be said. The web of reckoning was woven. The grand gambit was set. Tomorrow, at dawn, they would march on the Queen's castle. The final day of Premier Fashion Week dawned gray and unforgiving. The sky the color of dirty dishwater. Backstage at the Phoenix show. The air was thick with a controlled, humming tension. It was a stark contrast to the performative chaos Alara had glimpsed at other venues. Here, there was no screaming, no diva-like tantrums. There was only the quiet focus of a commando unit preparing for an assault. Chloe moved with swift efficiency, a headset connecting her to the stage crew. Eva stood like a statue, observing every detail, her presence a silent anchor of strength. Alara moved from model to model, making final, minute adjustments. Her touch gentle, but her eyes burning with an almost frightening intensity. Serafina Devereaux's show had been the headline event of the previous evening. It was a spectacle of obscene expense, a runway constructed of shimmering ice, a shower of real orchid petals for the finale, models draped in diamonds. The clothes were impeccably made, commercially flawless, and possessed all the soul of an accountant's ledger. The industry had applauded politely, praised the brand's unwavering consistency, and celebrated another profitable, predictable collection. Serafina had taken her bow, a vision of untouchable power, basking in the glow of a kingdom she believed was immutable. She had even decided, in a final act of supreme arrogance, to attend the Phoenix show. It was a power move, a queen visiting the hovels of a minor noble to show just how unthreatened she was. Now, seated in the front row, she radiated condescending poise, a faint, bored smile playing on her lips. The venue was packed. Liam's Arctics and the industry buzz had turned the undesirable early morning slot into the week's most anticipated event. The room was filled with a potent mix of skepticism, genuine curiosity, and the predatory hunger for either a new star to be born or a spectacular failure to mock. The lights went down. A single, haunting piano note echoed through the cavernous space. The show began. It was, from the very first look, a story. Act 1. The Dream. The first models emerged onto the stark white runway. The clothes were soft, ethereal, almost ghostly, flowing silks in pale, dawn-like colors, embroidered with delicate, intricate patterns that seemed to mimic spider webs or frost on a window pane. They were breathtakingly beautiful, full of a gentle, hopeful artistry. On the large screen behind them, faint, charcoal lines began to trace themselves into existence, the unmistakable, flowing hand of Maria's original sketches, animated to look as if a ghost were drawing them. The music was melancholic but sweet, a nightingale's song. It was a tribute, a memory of a pure, untainted dream. Act 2. The Theft. The music shifted abruptly. The sweet piano was jaggedly interrupted by a low, discordant electronic drone. The lighting turned harsh, casting long, menacing shadows. The next wave of models stomped onto the runway, their walks aggressive, their faces blank masks. The clothes were transformed. The silhouettes became hard, architectural, imprisoning. Fabrics were stiff, like armor. The color palette plunged into the funereal blacks and grays Alara had perfected. And then came the flashes of brutal color, a dress with a slash of blood red across the bodice, a coat with a lining that looked like an open wound. The ghostly sketches on the screen were scribbled over by a thick, aggressive black marker, obliterating them. The audience was visibly unsettled, captivated. This was not a collection. It was a confession. Act 3. The Resurrection. The discordant drone swelled, then resolved into a powerful, anthemic crescendo. A beat kicked in, strong and defiant as a heartbeat. The final wave of models emerged, and the energy in the room shifted from tension to awe. These were the Phoenix pieces, the culmination of Alara's entire journey. They were a fusion of the first 2 acts. The structural power of the second act was still there, but it was now imbued with the heartbreaking beauty of the first, Coats like shields opened to reveal linings of impossible softness. Dresses that looked like armor moved with a dancer's grace. The final model, the poet with the 1,000-story eyes, strode out in the white warrior angel gown. She was not an innocent victim or a hardened soldier. She was a survivor, purified by fire, her face a testament to unbreakable will. She stopped at the end of the runway, a breathtaking icon of resilience. The music swelled to a final, triumphant peak, and then cut to absolute silence. In the ringing silence, the audience held its breath, ready to explode into applause, but Alara did not emerge to take her bow. Instead, her voice, clear, steady, and amplified through the speakers, filled the venue. My name is Alara, and I am the daughter of a genius. On the giant screen, the image changed. It now showed a faded, beautiful photograph of a young Maria, her eyes full of light. Her name was Maria. She was a seamstress, an artist, and the true creator of the collection that launched the career of one of this industry's most celebrated names. A collective gasp went through the room beside Alara's voice. The screen became a triptych on the left, one of Maria's original Midnight Bloom sketches in the center, a runway photo from Serafina Devereaux's debut show from 2 decades ago on the right, the corresponding page from Arthur Finch's ledger, the payment to Maria for design commissions circled in red. The proof was absolute, irrefutable, and devastatingly simple. Slide after slide appeared, showcasing a dozen different designs, each one a direct, undeniable theft. In the front row, every camera, every phone, every eye swiveled from the screen to Serafina. The flashes began, a merciless, machine gun-like assault of light. Her bored smile was frozen on her face. Then it cracked, crumbling like ancient plaster. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted around as if looking for an escape. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, terrified mask. This wasn't just an accusation. It was a public execution. Ilara's voice came again, devoid of emotion, her tone as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. She built an empire on my mother's soul. She left my mother to die in poverty and obscurity. Today, that debt is repaid. The final image flashed on the screen, a single, fiery drawing of a phoenix. Then, chaos. The stunned silence erupted into a roar of shouting reporters and screaming socialites. Serafina, in a moment of pure animal panic, tried to stand and flee, but she was instantly engulfed by a tidal wave of journalists. Liam Thorne was at the forefront, his voice cutting through the din. Ms. Devereaux, what is your response to the evidence? Did you build your brand on a lie? Serafina, will you deny you knew Maria? She stumbled, her face a grotesque canvas of fury and fear, her carefully constructed world, her decades of lies, her entire identity, had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes. The Queen was naked in the public square, and the crowd was closing in. Her guards tried to push through, but the mob was too thick. She was trapped in the spotlight she had so desperately craved. But this time, it was burning her alive. Her reign was over. The serpent had fallen. Backstage, Alara stood in the shadows, her hand clutching her mother's last sketch. She watched the pandemonium on the monitor, her expression unreadable. The fire of vengeance had burned so long and so hot, and now, in the moment of its consummation, she felt not triumph, but a vast, quiet, hollow emptiness. The ghost she had been chasing for a decade had finally been laid to rest, and now, for the first time, she had to face the silence that came after. The fallout from what the press dubbed The reckoning runway was swift and brutal. Serafina Devereaux's empire, a monument built on stolen dreams and brittle lies, imploded. The stock price of her parent company plummeted into oblivion. Board members resigned in droves, issuing public statements of condemnation. Retailers canceled their orders, severing ties to avoid the toxic stain of the scandal. Serafina became a pariah overnight, a synonym for fraud, besieged by lawsuits and public disgrace. She vanished from the world, retreating into a gilded cage of exile. Her name forever etched in the annals of fashion history, not as an icon, but as a cautionary tale. Ilara, in contrast, was catapulted into the stratosphere. She was the industry's conquering hero, the giant slayer, the righteous new queen. The media couldn't get enough of her story. Investment offers poured in, along with invitations to every exclusive gala and collaborations with the world's most famous artists. She had everything she had ever fought for. The world was at her feet, and she felt nothing. In the quiet aftermath, once the noise of the explosion had faded, a profound, aching emptiness settled over her. The rage that had been her constant companion, her fuel, her armor for more than a decade, was gone, and in its place was a hollow silence. The revenge was complete. But it hadn't healed the wound. It had only cauterized it, leaving a clean, stark scar where a fire used to be. Serafina's fall didn't bring her mother back. It didn't erase the years of poverty and loneliness. The ghost was gone. But now Ilara was alone with herself. She confessed her feelings one evening to Eva, who looked at her with eyes that held the wisdom of old wars. "Revenge is a ghost that eats at your table," the old woman said softly. Placing a hand over Ilara's, "It promises a feast, but it leaves you starved. You tore down the rotten house, Ilara, but your true work is not in demolition. It is in architecture. Now, you must build." Her words, along with the unwavering support of Chloe and the steady, quiet presence of Liam, became Ilara's new foundation. She began to understand that her mother's true legacy was not the anger she felt over her death, but the love of creation Maria had embodied in life. Her purpose was not to be the queen of a fallen enemy's ashes, but the architect of a new world. Phoenix, under Ilara's new vision, became a force for radical change. Her first official act as the industry's new powerhouse was to establish the Maria Foundation, a non-profit funded by a significant percentage of Phoenix's annual profits. It was dedicated to providing grants, materials, and legal counsel to young, struggling designers from underprivileged backgrounds, ensuring that no artist would ever be as vulnerable as her mother had been. Her company became the gold standard for ethical fashion. She instituted transparent supply chains, paid her garment workers fair living wages, and invested heavily in sustainable, innovative materials. She was mocked by the old guard, who called her naive. But a new generation of consumers and creators rallied to her banner. They were tired of the soulless, exploitative machine. They were hungry for authenticity. They were hungry for a brand with a soul. A year later, the Phoenix Empire was more powerful than Serafina's had ever been, but it was a different kind of power, one built on respect, not fear, on integrity, not illusion. Ilara herself had transformed. The sharp, guarded, vengeful woman had softened. The hardness in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, compassionate light. She was no less strong, but her strength was no longer a weapon of war. It was a tool for building. Her relationship with Liam had deepened from a wartime alliance into a loving, stable partnership. He had helped her find the truth, and now he was helping her build a future upon it. The story came full circle on a crisp autumn evening at the first annual gala for the Maria Foundation. The event was held in a beautifully restored botanical garden, filled with the industry's most creative and forward-thinking minds. Ilara, in a simple but breathtaking phoenix gown of deep blue silk, was not the center of attention. Instead, she stood near the back, watching the stage. On it, the Foundation's first major grant recipient, a brilliant young man from the city's poorest district, was tearfully accepting his award. He spoke of his dreams, of his struggles, of how this grant meant he wouldn't have to choose between eating and buying fabric. He spoke of Maria, a woman he'd never met, as a patron saint for artists like him. Ilara felt a gentle touch on her arm. It was Liam. He said nothing, just smiled, his eyes full of a love and pride that mirrored her own. Across the room, Madame Eva, looking regal and content, raised a glass in a silent toast. In that moment, surrounded by the new, vibrant world she had built, Ilara felt a sense of peace that revenge could never have given her. She looked up through the glass ceiling of the conservatory at the star-dusted sky. She no longer felt the cold rage of a lonely girl vowing vengeance at a gravesite. She felt the warm, proud presence of her mother's spirit, not as a ghost demanding justice, but as a gentle, loving force, finally at peace. She had not only reclaimed her mother's stolen legacy, she had magnified it, transformed it into a beacon for others. She had finally brought the nightingale's song back into the world. The queen of a new dawn smiled. Her reign had just begun. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and justice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that touch the heart. We love our global family, so let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, why not check out another one of our stories? There's always a new world to explore.